What are you doing?
I was trying to get to the couch, but I couldn't get on there that way. Right on time and fully set up, just like every single live stream. Welcome, guys. We have a really fun one today. It is packed full of information and packed full of things that we've been asked about recently, too. So hopefully this is a good little live stream for y'all. I have notes printed out and everything, so that's going to be pretty amazing, right?
They're already saying that we're not 6 feet apart, by the way. So this is like a foot, right? I mean,
yeah.
So 6 feet, we got it.
We're way over 6 feet. We made out this morning to make sure we shared all the germs that we have. Don't worry.
Sounds good. Hopefully footage is good. All right. Actually, I can look at the footage. It seems just fine. So, boom. All right. Well, let's pull it up and get right into it. Shall we start with any news updates from Genus? Oh, you even printed it out.
Yeah, I got everything printed out. Like I told you, we are ready. I was here early enough to make sure I took care of all this stuff.
Good thing one of us was.
Yeah, right. All right, so the Genus updates, a couple things that happened this week. We made a tincture, which is going to be really fun. You'll learn more about that hopefully in a video that we publish. I'm thinking it's going to be Wednesday or Friday. That'll be the Will It Beer 3. And that's looking really good. We're finding some really fun things about how to separate out oils from everything else.
Yeah, we did kind of hose this.
Yeah, it is what it is. We did more live streams.
Yeah, trying to get some more live streams out. I don't know. Let us know if you like more of these live streams during the quarantine times. They're not too difficult for us to throw together for you, and we really like kind of talking to you guys, answering questions.
Makes it super easy to get that one-on-one connection or one-on-several connection, two-on-several connection. That's what we're talking about.
1 on 1,000.
Someone already noticed a handprint from one of our kids. I don't know which one.
Yeah, right there. That one was definitely one of my small ones.
Nice little oily handprint.
I was about to wipe that off, but then he yelled at me.
The good news about that is that means our camera is like super high def. You can see all the details.
We already launched a beer ordering to go on Square, right? Square.
Yeah, so we did a Square site, little beer ordering, not for delivery yet, because it's still we're not sure on the legality of that. I'm gonna have to recall the LCB officer.
Yeah, they told us the first time we couldn't deliver because we don't have a quote unquote approved package.
But there are a lot of people that are delivering right now that also don't have a quote unquote approved package.
I know, right?
I don't understand exactly. Maybe it has to do with the fact that we can't do to go food too, because a lot of people can do alcohol to go.
Yeah,
right now.
More or less our feedback was like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's illegal that people are doing, but we're not really doing anything about it. So
yeah, and overall we're doing pretty well. We're still able to do the homebrew supply side. Speaking of, we also have been looking into boxes to hopefully be able to get out some packaged recipe kits. Some of you have shown some interest in those, and so it'd be fun to get out some stuff that we have ingredients for that we do specifically that are unique to us and you can't get on Northern Brewer.
Yeah, that is actually on my to-do list for today, is to get those boxes ordered in so we can start kind of prototyping some branding on them. That's kind of been our big hang up on those, is trying to get a nice branded box that we can ship out so it doesn't look like just a janky random box with Peter's scribble writing on it for you guys.
My awesome branding is what you meant to say. That's definitely what it's called.
So, but yeah, working on some, that way we can start throwing some kits together when we start talking about these beer of the weeks and whatnot. That way we can put them up online so that if you all out there watching are interested in brewing that recipe, we will probably throw together some extract kits, as well as long as the beer is not super big, it seems like we can even fit some all grain kits in there. So.
Yeah, and one thing that we'll probably start doing, which will be probably related to this beer of the week thing, is making them pretty limited, so they will be available for that week. At least to start off with, one thing that does for us is make sure we're not going to have some huge supply issues where we just randomly run out of an ingredient right after we launch a kit about it. But they will be limited, and so look for those in the next 2-3 weeks, hopefully. The next we got a little bit of beer news that's kind of affecting a lot of people in our area. Cans are gone. Except for we got the last of them. We got the last. Yeah, every last can in the world we just bought.
Yeah, we one of our wholesale distributors on, I believe it was Monday, I checked, had 92 giant 300 can packages in stock on Monday, and then we forgot to pull the trigger on that order.
Yep.
And Peter checked yesterday, and they were all gone.
They were all gone. And that's something that I've been noticed. I follow, I'm on a Facebook group that's Craft Beer Professionals, and it seems to be a pretty consistent thing, especially for 32-ounce crowlers. And I checked on the American canning site, and 32-ounce crowlers are gone on their site, too. They've only got 16.
Me. Yeah, I think glass growlers are going to be becoming pretty damn scarce as well,
We're trying to stock up all we can, but definitely glass growlers are not as easy to get as they used to be. They're I wouldn't be surprised if the prices on those go up. Other than that,
overall packaging. So let's go right into our
beer of the week.
Nailed it.
Hey, crushing that.
Look at that. We're getting better now. So our beer of the week is actually going to be one that was inspired, I think, from a live stream we did just a couple days ago, right?
Yeah.
Which somebody was asking questions about this sort of weird, not true style, but a hybrid style, I guess we can call it. Doesn't even have any kind of BJCP guidelines on it, but that is a Milkshake Sour IPA.
Yeah, and it's a style that we've actually done before on a video a while ago. We figured we'd start by diving a little bit into methodology that we use, especially relating to the homebrew scale, because that's, a lot of you are just home brewers, not commercial brewers, and commercial brewers have different materials they can use. But in general, the style of doing a sour milkshake IPA goes for us like this. You take a mash, whatever mash you're going to use. Usually it's some high percentage of barley and a little bit of something fluffy like wheat or oats.
Yep.
You run that mash into a fermenter. You pitch some sort of lactobacillus, which is for us, it's usually a combination of a pitch of lactobacillus from Yeast, or just skip that altogether and only use acid malt. For a 5-gallon batch, we use about 2 pounds of acid malt. And we're looking for an acidity at this point of 4.2 to 4.5 pH. Usually on that lower end is what's called food safe. And then we let that sit for a day or two, kind of play it by taste, see how the pH drops. And then we'll bring that back out of the whatever fermenter, and we will go ahead and boil that up. And that's when we add hops and lactose. And then we finish it out like a normal fermentation.
Yeah. And I think a key point to doing this method of souring is, well, actually, there's a couple key points too, is that one, you actually want to keep this pretty warm so the lactobacillus can do its thing.
Yep.
Generally over 100 degrees, but we actually like to really shoot on that really high end of what lacto can actually ferment at before you kill it, which is about 120 to 125.
Yep.
The nice part about keeping it that warm, if you can, is that it will actually kill any type of wild yeast that might be in there, because otherwise what we've seen here happen actually in the past is that
Quite gets a hold of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it drops down to say 100
to
degrees or so, then it won't actually kill any kind of wild yeast strain or something like quake or some Brettanomyces that might be floating around in the air, and it'll actually take hold and start fermenting that beer.
Yeah. So what I'll usually do is like a kind of a step down stage, where the first day I might start it at that 120 degrees, let it sit there for a bit, and then over the next 8 hours maybe let it drop down to 110, get it down to 100, and then 90 is kind of where it usually finishes out before we're ready to ramp it back into a boil kettle.
Yep. So the next step is that you also want to make sure that you're not allowing at least the minimal amount of oxygen in. Lactobacillus does not like oxygen. It doesn't need it. All that oxygen is going to do is help any kind of infection, help any wild yeast that might get in there, kind of take root and infect that beer. So try to if you can, even if you have some CO2, wouldn't hurt to purge out that fermenter.
Yep.
And then easiest way to keep it warm at home is probably to actually throw a firm wrap on it with some blankets.
Yeah, on the 5-gallon scale or 23-liter scale or whatever you're using, 5 to 6 gallons, a firm wrap will actually be able to get a carboy or a bucket or a metal, brew bucket kind of thing,
yep,
up to that 100+ degree temperature range pretty dang easily.
Yeah, especially if you're wrapping some nice insulated blankets around it. So
yeah, we have actually fermented in a mash and boil before, and that also works, but I would actually probably prefer to ferment in something like the anvil, because you can control the actual power to the anvil and get that lower wattage density.
Yeah,
not worry about burning.
If you could turn that down to 10 or 15% and just kind of have it hold at 120.
That'd be the way to go.
That'd be the money game right there.
So, shameless plug for the Anvil Foundry.
So after you get that souring effect, obviously, like Peter said, you're going to throw that back into your kettle to kill off any funky funks that might be in there, kill off that lactose so it doesn't continue to do its souring. and then you are going to brew it whatever your favorite sort of New World IPA style is, usually loading that up on the back end.
Yeah, Whirlpool and stuff.
With some hops. And then, of course, to make it into that milkshake, you're going to add some lactose. You can go pretty heavy on the lactose, too. Typically, I think we'd shoot for close to about a pound for a 5-gallon batch.
And I've seen people go all the way up to 2 pounds. 2 pounds would be a little bit much for me. But
2 pounds will make it pretty damn sweet.
Yeah, but with all the acidity that you get from it being a sour, it can actually hold up to that 2 pounds. And so we aim for that pound to pound and a half, which is going to be like a half to 3/4 of a kilogram, something like that. In that 5-gallon or 18-liter batch. Trying to get both the metric and the... Yeah,
and then to answer a quick question on here, somebody's asking if it's the haze that makes the milkshake. And short answer is no. It's the haze is sort of a byproduct of the whole brewing process.
Yeah.
So that's I would say no. It's not just because it's hazy. It's because of a lot of things that are going into it.
Yeah, usually the milkshake sours they have the lactose in it, but usually they're also fruitage too, which I think is where that name kind of originated, because they can taste like a raspberry or a blackberry milkshake, whatever.
Yep. So on to our malt of the week.
Yeah.
Speaking of malts, is going to be Best Malls Acidulated Malt, which is the one that we use. We've used it many, many times to actually inoculate these beers to get these kettle sours going.
Yep.
And it's a fantastic malt, has live lactobacillus on it. Like we mentioned before, you just want to hit that on the hot end because it's also got a lot of other bugs on there. You want to take out of the equation before you pitch that into some fresh wort.
Yeah, and we use acidulated malt for a lot of things. We actually use it for regular mash chemistry. We use it for just kind of adjusting flavors a small amount. The nice thing that we like about the Best Malts acidulated malt is that not only does it have the lactic acid that you get from it being an acid malt, but it's got a complex array of other acids too that give it a more dynamic flavor than just adding, for example, if you added pure lactic acid to your mash for any sort of flavoring part of it.
And like we've said in the past, if you don't have an easy way to do it with the acidulated malt, then you can always use lactic acid. It isn't the end of the world for you.
Yep. And if you want to learn more about the acidulated malt, we actually did a whole video on acidulated malt. Look in our video library, and you should find it.
Sounds good. So, hop of the week.
Hop of the week.
Boom, boom. Go for it.
So the hop of the week is Simcoe. Simcoe is a hop that's been around for probably 12 plus years.
Actually, even longer.
Even longer than that.
Yeah, it was actually, I believe, don't quote me on this, I could be wrong, but I believe it was actually first bred in like the 70s and then sort of fell off the face of the earth until the 90s when one of the big breweries brought it back.
That doesn't sound right.
But
I'm looking it up.
It's an old hop, but anyway, so yeah, Simcoe used to be known as that sort of like marijuana dank hop, but honestly, anymore it's nowhere near that. These days, it's a very, very tried and true pineapple bomb in just about every beer I've used it in the past 4 or 5 years now. So in something that you want to have light, you want to have fruity, really build on that sweetness that the lactose is going to add, and really play off of that natural tartness, which if you have a pineapple fruit is also going to have, then that is just going to complement everything. So Simcoe is a very, very natural hop to use in this. I wouldn't be afraid to throw any other sort of New World big fruity hops. Things like Equinaut was kind of a close second when I was thinking about the best hops for this.
Oh yeah, I like the Simcoe idea because it's got a balance of that bitterness and assertiveness and a little bit of fruitiness too.
Yep.
Apparently it was released to the world in 2000. I have no idea when it was actually bred, but so over a 20-year-old hop in terms of when it hit the market. When I first started brewing, I knew Simcoe as like a piney, very piney. I'd combine it with Chinook a lot to get like the softer end of the pine, like the fruity end of the pine, and the Chinook was obviously the more aggressive end of the pine. But yeah, it's got a lot more complex. The actual hop list here says bright citrus flavors with earthy undertones, aromas of grapefruit, pine, and herbs. I've known it to be a little bit more fruitier and have that dankness that Logan was talking about. It is a higher cohemulone than some of the other.
And again, that's going to be how you use it as well too.
Absolutely.
You're going to be loading a beer style like this up. Honestly, like anything that you're boiling is pretty much pointless in a beer style like this.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's going to be Whirlpool. Everything's going to be dry hop. I mean, I'm talking like loading this thing up with like 6 ounces of Simcoe, like 3 in the Whirlpool, 3 in a dry hop. or any really variation of that will work just fine. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to throw a ton of hops at this beer style.
As long as it's not boiling, because you never want to add like that bitterness from an aggressively front end hopped beer on top of the acidity from a sour. Those two things just make it aggressive and assertive and not a very pleasant way.
Yep, shoot for 0 IBUs on your calculators, folks. I'm not even kidding, actually.
Well, now you can adjust. On Brewer's Friend, at least now you can adjust it. Even if
you can, yeah. You're going to get some utilization, but yeah, pretty much all post-boil hop additions for a beer style like this.
Yep.
So, which brings us to the final ingredient in this beer style, and that is going to be the yeast. And we're going to go on to one of my favorites that, honestly, people don't use enough because
we hardly ever sell it, which is kind of weird to me. We
Yeah,
sell dry hop more.
Yeah, we definitely sell dry hop more, but that is Imperial's A20 citrus yeast.
Yeah.
And
while we're keeping things hot, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Imperial likes to describe this yeast as being like Brettanomyces, but not like Brettanomyces, which is kind of a really vague description.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this yeast just throws nice, big, fat, fruity esters that complement any New World hop strain.
Yep.
And the trick to getting those out is fermenting it really hot.
85 degrees, folks.
Yeah. So it actually says on their website, I think it's 67 to 80.
Okay.
But I believe that's the strain that we fermented at like 100.
Around 100, yeah.
And so yeah, don't be afraid to bump it up to 80, mid 80s if you can even, and just let that sucker rip. Let it do what it's gonna do. It is a diastaticus variant, which they note on their website, but we haven't really had any issues with it. With that said,
don't bottle condition in it and like let it sit for a year.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the thing is generally we've been using it for beers that are designed to drink fresh. So
like this IPA.
Yeah, like this IPA. So
have it gone in a couple of weeks, and you'll be good. Doesn't matter if it's
not an issue. So, but yeah, ferment it hot. It'll do its thing. It'll give you amazing flavor profile, and yeah. A20 citrus.
So brew with all those ingredients. Make your own strawberry soured milkshake IPA, and then send us pictures because that sounds fun.
Bam.
Lactose makes beer smoother because it coats the polyphenols and tannins in the same way putting milk and tea reduces astringency.
That makes sense. It makes sense. Same thing with like capsaicin and stuff like that. Can
you use light DME Pilsner to substitute for lactose? No, yeah, they do work a little bit differently. Although DME isn't 100% fermentable, it is 75% fermentable, which is different than the lactose.
Yeah, DME, it's its own beast. So let's go into the meat of this live broadcast today, which is oak and beer. And I am subtitling this as a brief review just because I was up at 5 this morning kind of double checking what I knew and doing a little bit of research, and oak is quite the complex thing.
There's a lot that goes into it.
There's actually a book by I think John Buchard called Wood and Beer. That's like a 400-page book that has I think 50 of those pages is talking about different types of oak. So it's you can definitely go down the rabbit hole. So I tried to keep it as simple as possible while still hitting the key points of how oak might affect beer.
Oh yeah.
So historically, oak was used in just about every beer just because beer was stored in wooden casks or barrels.
Yep.
And so that sort of added its own attributes, usually negative though, because usually it just meant that they were contaminated with Brettanomyces or other things.
Well, ultra historically, oak was like, used in every aspect of it. You would cook an oak.
That's true, yeah.
You would ferment an oak. It would be there for,
Yeah,
you'd always get a little bit extra astringency or character off of the oak no matter what you did with it.
Yeah, stainless steel wasn't exactly widely available 300 years ago.
What? Are you kidding me?
I know, crazy concept, right? So, but anyway, modern uses of oak, I sort of tried to break them down into 3 main categories for you, and that is achieving a direct flavor from the oak itself, the wood itself, and then the char that will go with it a lot of times, especially if you happen to be using any kind of a barrel. And then the next kind of subtopic here is going to be flavoring from whatever was in that barrel or whatever touched that oak before.
Whiskey or port wine or rum or tequila.
Tequila. Boom. Or, yeah, so... or even beer.
Yeah, and the last one we have is just kind of inoculating, using the oak because it is porous and things can live inside it, using the oak as an inoculant. And that could either be in a barrel like we do with our Solera, where you have a wild microbe culture that lives in there and grows and owns that oak to its own, or if you're just using it, for example, like how the original Quake pitch is, where you just use the oak rings, you ferment on the oak rings, you dry out the wood, and then you have a pitch of Quake on your oak.
Yep. And just like what's in my cup of tea right here, oak is also full of different chemical compounds, but the two most important ones that I found are going to be tannins and lignins. And tannins are what are in your tea if you've ever had oversteeped tea and it has that weird astringent drying mouth coating character.
Yeah.
That's going to be what tannins are.
The banana peel.
And then lignins are a very hard molecule to break down that is also found in wood and very high in oak. And both of those happen to break down with heat, as well as to some degree over time and in the presence of sugars and other alcohols.
Let me go get that graphic ready while you're introducing
you're going to get the graphic? Sounds good.
I'll get the graphic.
So that's often why you are going to find oak being charred, and that is because the charring process breaks down those molecules and actually gives you all these nice aromatic aromatic profiles, and then also helps smooth out the flavor of the tannin. So instead of having that bite, you actually end up getting sort of more of a mouth-filling, woody character from them. And I am double-checking my notes here real fast because this kind of gets into craziness. So while I'm talking and stalling here for a second, Peter's actually going to pull up a graph. Some of you probably have already seen it, but it is a graph that explains the the correlation between temperature and actual flavor profile that you're going to get. And what I actually love to do when homebrewers come into the shop here is send them home with some untoasted oak chips. On a small scale, that's the easiest way to get oak in a beer by far. And you can take untoasted oak chips. Usually it's going to be American red oak, I think. But you can also use French and all kinds of other stuff. Honestly, any wood. But they're all going to work in a little different ways. But at the low end of the spectrum, you got untoasted oak chips. They're going to give you that green, that tannic character, that bite, which say that you have a big old imperial stout that didn't quite finish as dry as you wanted to, and it's kind of thick, kind of sweet. Throwing a little bit of that on there for a few months might not be the end-all, be-all, and might actually improve that beer. Oh, I should be able to pull it up here. I do not see that graphic right now.
You're a little bit behind them, so.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I'm a little bit behind. Oh, they can probably see it in front of me, actually. We got a super wide angle, so. So anyway, so the charts is going to give you that, like I said, the green oaky character, and then as you actually heat those oak chips up, as you toast them, usually I just recommend in your oven at home, up to about 300, a little over 300 degrees, you actually start pulling some sweet character. You start breaking down those lignins. And then right in the middle of the range, you really start to pull off a lot of that vanilla character, those vanillins in there that are what people usually seek out in like a good whiskey. Lots and lots of whiskeys have really strong vanilla profile. Yep, sorry. It doesn't appear to have... Okay, Peter's leaving me again.
I've got it. I can do it.
And so you get that vanillin profile right around 400 degrees, maybe a little bit higher if you want to go that route, because then you'll also start getting into some toasty qualities. And then on the extreme end of it, you actually can start pulling these really, really complex, nutty characteristics from it before, and that's going to be right around that 500 degree mark. So you're going to start getting a pretty heavy char on that.
I figured it out.
At that point. Bam. So speaking of oak chips and toasting them, I prefer to go to path of less is more. For a 5-gallon batch, honestly, a handful is all I use of oak chips. So maybe like half an ounce is all by weight of oak chips, and I would prefer to actually add those straight to the fermenter and let them sit on that fermenter for at least a few months versus.
You're talking about for oaking, or you're talking about for like inoculating?
For oaking, for getting that oak flavor, yeah.
Yeah, half ounce will be kind of on the light side. You really start to get that. Well, with oak chips, those can be really aggressive. First of all, that's important to know. Is if you try to do that, oak chips are designed to do quick oaking, and they kind of give 4 ounces as that 5-gallon batch. But that gets really like astringent oaking pretty fast.
And that's why I prefer to let them sit on there for a longer amount of time and just do their thing, because you'll also actually get some breakdown over time. That's why like a lot of whiskeys have to age for so long. Even if you're doing a small batch, it has more to do with just the surface area and a lot to do with just the amount of time that those oak chips are in contact with the liquid.
Yeah, I usually go like 2 ounces or 2 ounces or a little bit less, but I don't know about half ounce. That sounds a little bit low to me, but you'll definitely get some character with a half ounce. It'll just be like that kiss of character. But if you're going for like really bourbony oaky, then
it depends on
1 to 2 ounces.
The degree of toast too.
That's true.
Less as you ramp up to a darker toast. Yes, the graphic is up there now, I believe. You can probably take it back down now. They're probably just like, what is, yeah.
Done.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry about that. That was kind of a weird thing.
You're the one that told me to do that.
Okay.
Don't add graphics if you don't want me to add them. Also, I gotta run all the way over to the computer to turn them on and off.
So, all right. So I think that pretty much sums up getting oak flavor from the raw oak or toasting the oak itself. So what if you want some flavor from whatever was in that barrel before, though?
So for example, whiskey or tequila or tequila.
Or tequila.
Those are good examples.
Did you say tequila?
No, I think I said mezcal, but tequila's a good one too. Also, cachaça, because why not?
Which is actually Spanish cedar, right? That tequila's in?
Sure.
Something like that?
No idea. But yeah, so obviously because oak is porous, oak can withhold, it grabs onto wine or liquor especially because of the nature of the polarity of the molecule of liquor. But oak will actually hold on to that, and especially in a cooling phase, it'll grab onto a decent amount that it'll release when you have some natural expansion and contraction of the wood when you put some beer in it.
Yep. So one thing to consider is that if you are using oak barrels for a 5-gallon batch, these are things that you don't want beer sitting in for any length of time, because a lot of times the oak barrels that you get, your little 20-liter barrels, their staves on them are actually only going to be maybe a half-inch thick, maybe even thinner. And so those allow a lot of ingress of oxygen into the barrel. So if it is from, say, a whiskey or other spirit, throw the beer in there, let it pull out the flavors. Honestly, it'll infuse with those flavors within less than a week, I would say.
Yeah.
And then get that beer out of there, because all you're going to do is excessively oxidize it.
And also it's going to, you got to realize that you're getting a lot of the character from the whiskey and the oak a lot quicker in that small vessel because of the surface area to volume ratio. There's so much more surface area touching your beer on that small side. I honestly don't 100% of it like the idea of using those 5-gallon barrels. I think a 15-gallon barrel is about the smallest that I would go when holding beer into it, because you do get such a better flavor off of being able to hold it in there for a long amount of time, which is why the 55-gallon barrels are kind of the king in both the spirits and the beer world. Yeah,
and honestly, as a home brewer, don't feel like you have to use a barrel to get a quote-unquote barrel-aged beer.
Right.
So the reality is that as a commercial brewery, breweries are grabbing up all these barrels because what it essentially allows us to do is circumvent the law that says we cannot put any additional alcohol or any hard alcohol into our beers, and yet when we get a barrel from whatever distillery it is, a lot of times we got a 55-gallon barrel that might have 3 gallons of whiskey that's sloshing around in the bottom of it, not to mention the other probably 2 or 3 gallons that's soaked into the wood itself. So that's basically our way of sort of cheating the system and saying, hey, look, we just bumped our ABV up by like 2% and got all these awesome flavors out of this barrel.
Yeah, it is kind of a weird law, but I also think it might just be a specific Washington law. That's not something I know it's a Washington law, but I don't think it's an everywhere in America.
So yeah,
law.
but I think the point is as a home brewer, literally find whatever whiskey you love drinking.
And pour it right into your mouth.
Pour it into your beer. No, literally blend it into your beer if you want to get that profile. Also, you can take your oak chips, take your untoasted oak chips, take your toasted oak chips, which is what I've done in the past. I'll usually soak them in that whiskey whenever I'm brewing, or honestly, whenever you just get a chance. It's not going to hurt it just to sit in a nice sealed up jar, soak the living daylights out of some oak chips, and then just pour the whole shebang into a fermenter, and you'll get pretty close to an instantaneous infusion of flavor from that.
Yeah, and usually when I go a higher alcohol spirit on this one too, for whiskey, I like to go 50 or 60% alcohol, 100 to 120 proof. It's going to do a couple things. First of all, it's going to release and mellow some of the harshness from your fresher oak chips, and then also it's going to just keep things sterile. Technically, sterile is above 70% alcohol, but that 50 to 60 is kind of where
you're going to be just fine.
Yeah. 40 is kind of that's rolling the dice a little bit.
What's the next? I lost track.
Oh, something about other ways to drink whiskey.
Other ways to drink whiskey.
So yeah, you can shoot it. You can do it in a Manhattan. Do it in an old fashioned Sazerac. So you already talked about adding oak chips to do. Oh, let's talk really quickly with this whole infusion thing. So you add the chips and the whiskey, whatever spirit you're soaking it into your beer. I don't know if you mentioned that.
Yeah,
but chips aren't the only way to go. There's a lot of other oak that you talked about long-term aging. Things that are long-term aging that you can use on the small scale instead of using chips, because chips are very high surface area, are things like honeycombs and cubes.
Yeah, so we also carry those here. Your local homebrew shop should probably carry something of that nature as well. And so these are designed to act in different ways. There's, without getting too deep into it, there's long grain and short grain, which is just the way they cut the oak, either against the grain or with the grain. And those are going to infuse at different rates, and supposedly they'll give you different flavors. I'm not knowledgeable enough to really tell you the difference in profile you're going to get from those guys, but the bottom line is that there is a wide array of oak options out there for you. There's even, one of the things we carry are these oak sticks, which are about 8 inches long, so like 8 inches long.
Yeah.
And they those you can throw right into a carboy. That's what they're designed for your long-term aging. So
easy to get out, unlike some other stuff might be.
Yeah, beer, wine, you name it, they'll get the job done. I recommend using those for about 9 months if you can. So
just let them sit. The longer the better.
The longer the better. Better the longer the better. And so I think that is so let's talk about wine now, actually, too, because whiskey barrels, spirit barrels are a pain in the butt to get to these days. Everybody is clamoring for them, and wine barrels are usually a lot easier to get to, but they sort of come with their own issues, and that is that they, first of all, are usually going to be way less sanitary. A lot of times they'll sulfite the barrels, but that doesn't really kill everything that's deep ingrained into the pores. So knowing that wine barrels actually work great for any beer that's going to have either high alcohol to kind of help mitigate any infection you might get, and or using them for sours.
Yeah, or also if you just know your kind of common holding practices, things like you want to sulfur your barrels if it's stored with just wine in it for any length of time, and you want to get that wine character to stay fresh, but you don't want the barrel to get inoculated. Sulfur is usually a good way to hold or sanitize, or also just a citric acid holding solution is pretty common too.
Yep. So we actually used a barrel to make one of the best saisons I've had in a while. And that was from some kind of a dark red wine.
It was a Bordeaux.
There you go. So the other thing is picking a beer that the wine flavor is going to complement it. With that said, a lot of these barrels are more or less, all the oak character has been pulled out of them. They've used them for several batches of wine a lot of times, and so that's why the wineries are actually retiring. So they work fantastic for sour barrels as a result, which all you got to do is inoculate them.
Yeah. So let's start with base beers for sours. I usually like to go with really strong, what I call killers for my base beers. And saisons are perfect because a lot of saisons have very competitive yeasts. Competitive yeasts like to create an environment that they love to live in and other stuff does not love to live in. And so it kind of makes a really good base for what we do for like a Solera or any kind of mixed culture sour.
So speaking of mixed culture sours, sorry, I was getting distracted there.
Stop getting distracted.
So oak barrels work fantastic for those because one of the main points is that they do breathe. And like we talked about earlier, the small barrels allowing in a bunch of oxygen, not so good, but the big barrels happen to allow in just a really small amount of oxygen, which can really develop the flavor profile of a sour. They're going to allow it to have just enough oxygen to get a little bit of acetic character going on, a nice complex profile without turning your entire batch of beer into vinegar.
And they can also let certain bugs kind of grow and create their own microbiome as well. A lot of bacteria, what they'll do is once they start to create a habitat of their own, what do you want to call that? Their own
ecosystem.
Yeah, their own ecosystem. They'll actually start to protect against what they don't want to inhabit their ecosystem, which includes things like creating a pellicle, which will keep out oxygen.
Yeah, and you will see that form if you're actually doing a true sour in a barrel. I'm sure we've got one in ours that's been we started back up. When was that? In the fall? So
it's been a while ago.
6 months now.
Yeah, it might be longer than that.
Maybe a little
It's
bit.
about time to keg up.
A little bit longer. Yeah. So you can use these for Solera. Speaking of which Solera simply means that it is a mixed fermentation that you are pulling half, sometimes a little bit more of the finished beer off of, and then topping that off with fresh wort and allowing the natural ecosystem of microbes, generally, at least a dozen, if not more microbes, to just keep on doing their thing, keep sitting on the bottom. You're literally leaving them on the tube. So you're allowing autolysis to happen. You're allowing this natural degradation of yeast cells to kind of grow and die in there, and that really develops a complex beer in the end.
It also means that your beer is going to go in kind of cycles, which so sometimes your beer will taste not very good, especially early on, and then it'll go into a period of tasting really good, and then it'll go into kind of tasting not very good, and then back into tasting really good. Let's go into how we made our Solera the very first time that we did. We already said that we started off with the Saison, and then we added a bunch of different kind of bugs from all sorts of different sources.
Yeah, basically we found all of our old sours. I know I took one that had been sitting around in my house that I think was like a Rosalaire blend or something like that.
A hot number of years.
For I think it was about a year old, and took the dregs of that, pitched that in, found some bottles of sour beer, pitched those dregs in. Ultimately, it is really hard to pitch too many sour bugs into a sour beer. And that's really just the nature of the beast. You actually want to have fewer regular yeast strains and more bacterial strains, more Brettanomyces strains, more Sactois strains,
more strong strains.
So
but you basically can do multiple multiple Saison strains. I think French Saison is kind of our go-to, just because it's first of all a diastaticus derivative, and then also because it is a killer.
Yep.
But yeah, you definitely want to give that time to give cultures. And what we actually did, because it's a 55-gallon barrel, since we're also a homebrew supply store and we have yeasts kind of going out to date. I know as our yeasts were getting old, we'd be like, oh, this Rosalaire happens to be getting a little bit old. Open up the barrel, let's throw that in.
Yep.
Same thing when we had bootleg biology for a hot minute. And like a lot of those, we didn't sell right off the bat, and so we open up the barrel, throw those in.
So yeah. So ultimately, some will die, some will grow. And then lastly, take advantage of the seasons. That's actually something we try to plan on. So as it's coming into spring here, like Peter said, for our Solera, we will probably try to keg something up, and then we'll actually let those kegs age for an additional amount of time, probably another 6 months or so. And but we know that it's kind of going into the warm season, which is when all those reactions really kind of kick into high gear. Instead of being 60 degrees in here like it has been all winter, it's probably going to be closer to 70, 75 on some days. And so what we'll kind of try to do is schedule so that we probably keg up in, say, May or something like that, and then kind of let that summer do its thing, and let that fresh wort really have some good high temps to work with.
Yeah, and the last kind of unspoken thing that I'm going to go with unspoken, because a lot of people in the homebrew world don't really talk about this or know about this. That goes with any sort of barrel aging, whether you're barrel aging for the raw oak character, for the whiskey character, or for the sour character, is blending. Blending is the number one thing that big barrel programs around the country do that makes their beer always consistent and always really delicious.
Yep. So if you do have multiple barrels, which I guess on a homebrew scale you're probably not going to have, but if you got multiple carboys of sours going, never be afraid.
Never be
afraid to blend them together.
And you can also blend with neutral too. So let's say you do make a really aggressive sour that's kind of too much, but it's got a lot of great underlying flavors. You can make a neutral beer or even just a regular kettle sour just to blend back into it. So don't pitch it just because it might be a little bit over aggressive. Always know that you can come back and.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, take a basic wheat beer base and just
blend it back.
Make them married.
Let's hit a couple of quick questions before we go on to our last topic of the day, since I've seen some stuff. Any help building a big barley wine recipe? We have actually a video that's probably going to be coming out in the next couple weeks where we're going to talk all about brewing high gravity beers. They are actually very difficult to brew. So
figure super low efficiencies and then keep the grain base simple.
Yeah, and keep your yeast super. So any high gravity beer, you need to be really, really careful with how you treat your yeast. It says you haven't brewed before. I don't know if that's the beer that I would try to tackle.
Yeah,
right
probably not the best first beer to go for.
If you're doing an extract, I would say just use Pilsen malt and then a little bit of brown sugar to get your alcohol up, and then pitch a crap ton of yeast. But I wouldn't aim for honestly more than 9% if it's your first beer, and even that's kind of going for it. Our general barley wine recipes, we find a really great single grain that we like. We do a high gravity mash and we boil the hell out of it, and then we ferment it.
Yep, get those Maillard reactions. That's really going to give you a lot of complexity in the end.
But there is a lot more that goes on to brewing high gravity, so we'll go over that in a video by itself.
Biggles is asking about oak aging in a keg, and yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the better ways to do it.
You can oak age in anything. In fact, yeah, keg's probably going to be good because, sealed up stuff and no bugs getting in there.
Do you need a spun valve, those kegs that you're aging? With a diastaticus, a diastaticus derivative, no, not really. You just kind of have to know what your final gravity is going into the keg, and you can kind of calculate back.
Yeah, I think what we've done in the past with them is we actually keg the beer but don't pressurize or carbonate the beer. Obviously, when they're going into the keg from the barrel, there's no carbonation to it. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll let them kind of sit and hang out, and more often than not, they'll carbonate themselves, and then we throw them in the walk-in, and that'll keep any further fermentation at bay because it makes things go to sleep and stuff.
There's an update. It wasn't his first beer ever. It'll just be his first barley wine.
Gotcha.
That makes a lot more sense. but yeah, basically keep it as simple as possible. Don't add a lot of specialty malts. Pick one grain that tastes really good as a base grain. Do a high gravity mash and boil the hell out of it.
Pitch 3 times as much yeast as you think you need.
And oxygenate with pure oxygen, not with an aeration stone. And add a lot of nutrients. Keep your osmotic pressure low.
I think they get it, Peter.
Okay. There's a lot.
I think they get it.
Yeah. Whole video coming up on how to make high gravity beers.
Okay. And yeah, so spunding, answer that. All right.
I think we're on to the next topic.
On to the last topic.
Water chemistry. People have been asking us about water chemistry for a hot minute. And we still need to go over a more comprehensive overall video where we dive into the specifics of each type of addition that you can do and what you're aiming for with water chemistry.
You should actually scoot back a little bit too. You're not even in the frame.
I should scoot back?
Yeah. I'm barely in the frame right now.
Why'd you make the frame so low? Or I can just go make the thing go higher.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm going to make the thing go higher. You tell me when I'm in.
Oh, gosh. Meanwhile. I don't know why that was so low either. It's probably because we scooted up out of the frame.
All right. We'll hope that does it. And if not, I'll adjust it again in 5 minutes when I can tell on your computer.
That should be fine. Okay. Yes, so anyway, on to water chemistry. So we kind of broke down a fun little thing for you all, and that is the do's and don'ts of water chemistry.
Yeah.
Peter, you want to go with start off with the do's?
Yeah, so the first thing that you want to do when you are thinking about your water chemistry is it comes down to what your source of water is going to be. So if you're using your tap water, or thinking about using your tap water, the very first thing is to make sure that your tap water doesn't taste bad in the first place.
Yeah, so if your tap water tastes like, I think like a good example around here actually, if it tastes like rust, that's probably not a good sign. We have a lot of old pipes around here. A lot of them are very prone to rust. I know in my house, when they were flushing the lines, especially out in town, it was my water literally poured red, and accidentally put that in a beer. Fun fact, it'll make your beer taste like rust.
Take a critical sample of your water and make sure it tastes good. Out here, actually, our tap water in this location tastes fantastic.
Pretty damn good, yeah.
So we use our tap water, but that comes to the next do, which is find out your local water chemistry. Know what you're starting with.
Yeah, so our water around here happens to be pretty high in bicarbonates, but really not much else, which is great. It makes for a more or less clean slate, but pretty much every city will post some sort of a basic breakdown of what your water chemistry is going to be. And so look for your dissolved bicarbonates is going to be like calcium carbonate or calcium bicarbonate, but then also look for the two key ones, which are going to be your dissolved sulfate and your dissolved chloride, which I think brings us on to...
You're jumping ahead a little bit.
Oh, am I jumping ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you even looking at the notes?
Nope.
Oh, your battery's running low, by the way.
My battery's running low.
The next thing, before getting into specifics of water chemistry, is know whether your local water source sanitizes the water with chlorine or chloramine, because those two things work differently.
Yes, chlorine will actively
Evaporate.
That's I was thinking dissolve. I'm like that's not the right word.
I mean, it will dissolve. It just takes a little
Yes.
forcing to dissolve.
Chlorine will evaporate by the time you even get your water up to a strike temperature. So 150 degrees, there ain't no more chlorine in there.
Yeah, unless it's like a really, really high dose. So chlorine, if there's a subtle chlorine flavor, it's usually fine by the time you get to strike temperature, like you said. That said, if you're going to use anything, if you're going to like directly sparge with it, know that there shouldn't be any chlorines, because as soon as chlorine hits sugar under heat, it does form a chlorophenol, or a precursor to chlorophenol, something like that,
Yep.
that sticks. But if you have chloramine will not evaporate.
Yeah, so chloramine's something you'll have to address, usually with some metabisulfite or Camden tablets.
Yeah.
But
Or a carbon filter.
it is also pretty easy to. Am I jumping ahead again?
Huh? No?
But it's pretty easy to just buy some water from the store too.
I guess a little bit jumping ahead, but yeah, that's something we can definitely talk about.
Which is another do. So yeah, don't be afraid if you're worried about your water, if it doesn't taste awesome. Don't be afraid to go to the store, buy some RO water, buy some distilled water. You can always build up any water profile from scratch. It's really not that hard. Don't be afraid to do it. Don't be words are hard this morning.
Yeah, I really don't know if you're trying to be a do or a don't on this, because he has it listed out as like these are the do's and these are the don'ts, and then he's just jumped ahead to the. So yeah, don't be afraid to buy distilled water. That also means do buy distilled water if you think you need to. So one of those two things, distilled water or RO water, starting with a blank slate, is always a good idea, especially if you want to really, really get to understand your water chemistry and know everything that you need to add. But let's go into the specifics of what you're looking for when you're building water chemistry. The first is knowing what flavors or effects you are looking for. Are you looking for a cleaner beer? Are you looking for something that's bright and tinny, or are you looking for something that's soft? Are you looking for something that's malty or hoppy? What's the mouthfeel that you're going for? All these can be affected by water chemistry.
They sure can. I was going to try to cut in at some point there, but yeah. So to put things into perspective, if you're brewing a Kolsch, you're probably going to want to have a lot softer water chemistry compared to something like a West Coast IPA, where you're going to want to have some aggressive character to it.
That's right. So yeah, and understand what you're looking for with each particular mineral, which we're about to give you a sort of quick rundown on right now.
Yeah, so like I kind of mentioned earlier, the most important minerals are your sulfates and chlorides. More specifically, the ratio of those two. So regardless of how much you have dissolved in your beer, if you want a sharper profile, you're going to want to have a really high sulfate to chloride ratio, so more sulfates. Whereas if you want to soften that profile, you're going to want to add more chlorides, so you have a higher chloride to sulfate ratio.
Yeah, and the ratio is important for whether or not it's going to be bitter or malty, but overall, the volume of both will be important if you're thinking about your whole brew in terms of, is it going to be that minerally profile, or is it going to be clean? Is it going to be clean and hoppy? In which case you can have something like a 5-to-1 sulfate to chloride ratio, where your sulfates might be 50 parts per million and your chlorides might be 10 parts per million. Or you're going to have a more minerally overall profile, but with more of a balanced range. Let's say you have 200 parts per million of sulfate and you have 150 parts per million of chloride. That's going to be a very minerally beer, but it's also going to be a more balanced range in terms of hoppy versus malty.
Yeah, so also the other thing to check for is your total level of dissolved bicarbonates. And so, for instance, around here, we generally have about 100 ppm, 100 to 150, but where I live out of town, it's closer to 300. And what that means is that if you brew a dark beer, it's hard to go wrong on, but any kind of a lighter beer, then you're going to end up with a very, very minerally chalky sort of finish to it, and that just has to do with the overall hardness of the beer. And
it also affects your mash pH. Bicarbonate is a natural. It acts as a natural base. It uptakes hydrogen, in which case it basically buffers against having a lower mash pH. Which grain are naturally acidic, but if you have something in the range like we have, where our pH, our water pH is 8, and our dissolved bicarbonate is about 100. Here I think it's 120 parts parts per million. If we mash in with all neutral grains, we're probably going to get a mash pH about 5.5, which is one of the reasons that we almost always use acid malt in our beers.
Yeah, so it's never a bad idea, actually. Acid malt always just kind of rounds out the profile of any light beer.
Yeah.
Probably don't need it if you're throwing a bunch of crystal or roasted malts in there, but any light beer, never a bad idea. And
another thing to think about with overall bicarbonate is your water profile that you get should have something called RA, or residual alkalinity. But we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the effects of calcium when you're looking at your water profile.
So calcium is an essential, dissolved calcium, I should say, too, is actually essential to converting your mash. So if you do plan on using or starting with all distilled water, for instance, you actually need to have some dissolved calcium in there. Luckily, when you're adding other salts, usually it has plenty of calcium.
Yeah, calcium sulfate is gypsum. Calcium chloride is a common thing that you add.
So yeah, but that calcium is something that you definitely need for your mash.
That's right. So besides that, calcium also does a couple other things. One, it reduces the residual alkalinity because calcium can, under heat, actually uptake some of that bicarbonate. And so calcium reduces the residual alkalinity of your mash, meaning that your mash will be more susceptible to pH change if you have more calcium in your mash.
Yep. So otherwise, mashes have a pretty impressive buffering effect. So just kind of not overdoing it, I guess, is what we're trying to get at here is start with your sulfate to chlorides probably, right?
Right.
Next, worry about calcium. Actually, first start with what water you have to work with.
Yeah.
And then you can get into other finer details, things like adding a little bit of sodium in there.
Which is something we like to do.
And then also, doing mash pHs and stuff like that.
The other thing to think about with just trace minerals in general, but magnesium's one. Calcium to magnesium ratio is supposedly going to be in that 1:5 range, or 5 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium, and that's for yeast health. However, it doesn't really take into account the fact that your grain has a good amount of magnesium in it, and when you boil water, calcium comes out of your water. So if you have a water profile and you pre-boil any of your water and you end up with those little specks at the bottom, that's a lot of your calcium coming out of your water profile.
Yep, that's all your calcium carbonate. Calcium's a thing. Yeah, magnesium, you get plenty of it from your grains, so I really don't ever worry about magnesium.
I'll throw it in sometimes just for safe measure.
Which that would be in, Epsom salt, right?
Yep.
That's magnesium. Yeah. So simple Epsom salt. All right, so shall we go into... do start a stockpile? What? Oh, stock profile.
Stock profile, yeah.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, keep notes on it too. That's I think what you're saying there, right?
Well, I said start with so my last do was start a stock profile. That means a profile that you're comfortable using for a lot of different beers. And what I did is I just went ahead and printed out on my little note sheet all the stock profiles that come on Brewer's Friend.
There you go.
Now you've got 2 different kinds of balance profiles, and we can take a quick look at these in a little bit and kind of give you a general idea of what they'll taste like. But you got a couple of balance profiles. You got some light colored and malty profiles, light colored and hoppy profiles. Burton on Trent, you got some historic profiles, and then profiles for different styles of beer. But honestly, what I would do is I would aim for one profile and brew a lot of your beers around that to start off with. And then after you learn a little bit and get used to that profile, then start tweaking and adjusting. A lot of what we do here comes from experience and comes from a lot of beers that we've made. And so the additions that we made aren't really aiming to hit a certain target profile like you look in the water book, like where we're trying to hit that right IPA or Hellas profile. Now, a lot of them come from just our own experience and, the thousands of beers that we've brewed when we're trying to, build a certain taste.
Yeah, it's like, hey, what do we want this beer to be like? How do we want it to be different from our other beers?
Yep.
Because that is the beauty of water chemistry, is that if you have brewed for a while, what you'll probably notice is that you sort of get a house flavor profile to a lot of your beers. You'll kind of say, oh yeah, that's a good beer. I brewed that beer. And then if you do start playing with water chemistry, you might actually go, wait, what? That beer came out of my house? Like, that doesn't taste like any beers that I brewed. And that is attributed to the water chemistry that you're doing. Oh, and my computer died. Sweet.
Yeah. Don't worry. I've got notes on mine.
So yeah, as for don'ts, like we mentioned before, don't worry too much about chlorine. Chlorine, as long as you are heating up your water, will evaporate.
If you have diatomic chlorine.
Yes. So yeah, don't fret. I know a lot of people are like super paranoid about that. Just don't like sparge with cold tap water or top off actually.
Yeah.
That is one thing that we usually suggest to extract brewers is don't just top off from your tap.
Yeah.
Go buy some distilled water. It'll actually help lower your total hardness anyway because you already got some of that in your malt extracts.
Yeah.
So, and then what's the last don't? There's one more don't.
Don't be too anal about mash pH.
Oh, yeah. Don't be too anal about mash pH.
As
Unless
long as you're not crazy high or crazy low, you should be fine. So
yeah, I was going to say.
You don't have to hit 5.2. You can hit as low as 5 or even a little bit under 5, and you can hit as high as 5.4, 5.5, and still not really notice an effect.
Yep. So, yeah, especially with our malts these days, we got fantastic malt to work with. That is the beauty of modern brewing. And, so that sort of sums up our semi-basic water chemistry, like more like
That's pretty basic.
More like information diarrhea water chemistry, but
yeah. Do you want to go over any profiles, or do you want to try to analyze one of them, or do you want to just go into Q&A?
We can pretty much, I think, go into Q&A now.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and look at what we've got.
Saw somebody asking about spring water on there.
Brewing with spring water, do or don't. Yeah, spring water is actually fine.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is they usually add calcium and potassium, which kind of smooths out the overall flavor of the water. Yeast will enjoy that, but it's not to a degree that it's really going to affect your overall flavor. They've got trace minerals, and that's about it.
Yeah, spring. It depends actually a lot too. I don't know if they're talking about their personal spring too, or if they're buying actual spring water.
They're guessing they're talking about spring water.
Yeah. So yeah, either way, it's
maybe
tough
don't
to
brew
say.
with your personal spring.
No, you could brew with your personal spring.
It depends.
Yeah, and that water is going to vary by region. It might be super soft. It might be super hard. You can actually taste it. I can usually taste when water is softer versus harder. I know over on the west side it tends to be quite a bit softer than here. Like I call it sweet water, where our water is not sweet. Where on the west side it actually has a sort of sweet flavor profile to it.
All right, so we've got a question that's gypsum to chloride 2 to 3 parts per NEPA and mashing on the high end 158. So we hardly ever actually mash high. What we'll do with a NEPA instead is we'll mash at a normal temperature like 152, and we'll add a crap ton of oats and flaked stuff. That will give you the same thickness but with a lot more character than just mashing on the high side. The reason we don't like to mash on the high side is because there's a lot more variability if you're not kind of hitting both the alpha and beta amylase in terms of what your specific malts can be, because we're very used to like Great Western 2-row, but if we were to switch up the malts, we're not sure. Like Great Western 2-row, if you mash that at 158 degrees, you'd still get a pretty dry overall beer. But other ones that you might not. It might get a different range of flavors.
Yeah, typically we actually mash on the pretty extreme low side. I mean, we're below 150 on most mashes. Generally, 145 to 148 even.
That's kind of where we land on. And that works out really well for us. Actually.
Yeah. Really, the only situation where I would mash high would actually be if I'm trying to shoot for a low alcohol beer on purpose, and that's just because your final gravity is going to be higher.
Yep. So you get a little bit of thickness behind it too, and some extra body, and then also just don't make as much alcohol.
Yep. That's which is why we really don't do it, because that's kind of a waste of grains for us.
As for the chloride to sulfate ratio, you can go you can go all the way down to like 3 to 1 and even higher than that on the chloride to sulfate ratio. The thing that we like to do that's kind of our trick when it comes to doing New England IPAs is instead of just adding calcium chloride, we'll add a combination of calcium and sodium chloride. A little bit of sodium, if it's in the right balance, can actually help emphasize that malty character that you're looking from chloride, without overall impacting the flavor. And it makes it so we don't have to get that chloride content up to 100 plus or 150 plus parts per million. We can keep the overall minerality low, but add a lot of great depth of character.
Yeah, our typical additions, when they're scaled down to a 5-gallon batch. Just to throw out a few random numbers, our salt additions might look something like 3-ish, 4-ish ounces of
grams.
Yeah, not ounces. Good catch there. Yeah, grams of of some calcium chloride, and then a couple 3 grams of sodium chloride, and then a couple
2-3 grams,
and then a couple 3 grams of gypsum as well, just to help balance that out. So you're actually
ascorbic acid in everything.
Yes, and then another probably 4-ish grams of ascorbic acid. So yeah, just kind of throwing out some random numbers. So we're talking somewhere in the range of like 10 grams or less of total water salts, which you'll see a lot of recipes have way more than that, and we just like to avoid it when we can, because it's not necessary necessary for one thing. And if you do already have a pretty hard water profile to begin with, it can actually end up blowing the total hardness out of proportion as well.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people, especially in our area, brew harder water beers. And so we actually have a unique character by brewing full-bodied and beers with a lot of good texture, but don't necessarily have that overall hardness. So we go with the lower mineral content for sure. Dan5505 asks, is 200 parts per million milligrams per liter bicarbonate and calcium carbonate too high for lighter beers? Yeah, I would definitely cut that down.
It's on that fringe for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to do like a really minerally Czech style pilsner, it might work. But
you want to add some lactic acid for your mash regardless. But for the overall flavor profile, most beers are going to be anywhere between half that and a quarter that.
Yep.
And then obviously on the lightest end, like the true OG lager beers, those are going to be way less than that.
Yeah.
Those are going to be very, very non-minerally beers.
And it's a very simple fix too. What I do at home, I've probably said this a few times already on YouTube, but I just sparge with some distilled water. I just go to the store, buy like 3 or 4 gallons of distilled water and sparge out with it. That'll cut my total hardness down and really help round out those beers.
Yep, and you can also pre-boil your water. That'll, like we said before, that'll help reduce that hardness as well.
Yep.
Sometimes you don't want to take the extra step. Just go buy a 5-gallon thing of water and cut your water down a little bit.
Yeah, that'll drop it down
to
right around I think 100 ppm, somewhere in there.
Depends on what you're aiming for. Do you use online calculator for your water calculations, or is there a pen and paper option? There is a pen and paper option. I have done the pen and paper option. That was quite a while ago when I was a fresh young biochemist. I use online calculators. It's
if you got them, use them.
They use Brewer's Friend.
They work. Don't get like super worried though. Don't be like, oh my God, I went over by 0.1 grams. It's gonna ruin everything.
Yeah.
But then also just use the old noggin up there. Like those numbers are pretty much spot on, and I just sort of pulled those out of my butt.
Grab a handful of whatever salts you find out. Just salt them into the mash, and you're probably gonna be fine.
Yeah, just take your salt shaker and.
As long as it's Himalayan. Can we pick up grains from you? Call in first, then pick up maybe. Yes, you can still pick up grains from us. We are doing like takeout to go kind of stuff. So call in ahead, give us your grain recipe, and we will put it together, and then we'll have it ready to go on the checkout thing, and you can just come in, grab your grains, swipe your monies, and off you go.
Yeah, we got everything to go right now.
We can air high five from 6 feet away.
Pretty much.
Recommendation for a comprehensive home water testing kit.
Ooh.
There's a water testing company in Oregon actually that I don't know about a home water testing kit actually. There's a lot of people will send theirs in. We just get our water from tested from the city, but
yeah, they can oftentimes be pretty expensive, but don't be afraid to ask the city. Every now and then a city will actually offer some basic water testing stuff for you.
Yeah.
So never be afraid to ask that. Otherwise, that's probably one of those things that I wouldn't worry too much about unless you're like out on your own well and you're getting well water. Then it's probably not a bad idea, just because it's going to probably vary from whatever else is around you.
Yeah. Beginner advice: what minerals do you recommend someone to buy if they have just started getting into water chemistry? You got to start with gypsum, calcium chloride. Those are probably the two I'd say buy first.
Yep.
You have salt at home, so don't worry about that. But yeah, we're about some gypsum and calcium chloride, and then just focus on balancing your sulfates with those two. Eventually getting into some sodium chloride instead of always using calcium chloride, so you don't get your calcium hella high. But
and by weight, they're not perfect, but they are close-ish. They're like, I think like a 1 to 0.8 ratio of by weight. So if you want to kind of guesstimate, you can always just say, hey, if I want this ratio, I can do approximately this many grams to that many grams. So.
In Spokane, just because I knew our water a long time ago, the beginner advice that I gave to everybody actually here with a relatively low mineral profile but overall high bicarbonates was a half a teaspoon of gypsum and an eighth of a teaspoon of table salt was what it went into pretty much every 5-gallon mash. And that's a pretty good balanced profile to be slightly more on the minerally side. That's specific to Spokane, though. What are all the ways to reduce mineral levels for style like Pils or Helles? Filter is one. Even just a carbon block filter will get rid of chlorines, first of all, and then it'll also dramatically reduce the mineral content. Reverse osmosis, obviously. But then, like Logan keeps saying, just use your tap water, but then cut it down with distilled water that you buy from the store.
That's honestly, it's the way to go. Way. It's by far the easiest method, is just sparge with some distilled water. It'll basically cut your minerality in half, which is perfect for most situations on beers like a Helles.
Yeah. Not beer related, but what's the weird spooge-like stain on the back of the couch between you two? This is actually, so we started a series on Pornhub called Casting Couch, and this is the couch we use. Oh, actually, it's just greasy fingers from our kids.
Yeah.
I made an extract stout, about 2 pounds of roasted steeping grains, and made my boil pH 4.86. I didn't adjust or measure post-boil. What effect can I expect? Anything with 2 pounds of roasted barley will be on the astringent side. It'll be.
Oh man, that's a lot of roasted barley.
It'll be bitter, but it won't be. It won't ruin your beer. I'll say that. It won't ruin your beer, but it'll taste astringent. You'll get that acidity for sure.
That's gonna taste like roasted barley for sure. That's a lot of roasted barley.
Yeah,
hopefully
you'd have to
get some like super high amount of flaked adjuncts in there.
Yeah. Jamil Z recommends Malt test kit. They use the pro version at his brewery, 150 for like 80 test kits or so. Oh, that's kind of cool. Malt test kit for your water. Like I said, we just get ours from the city, so I haven't done a home testing kit. I know there's one in Portland that you can send your water to, and I think White Labs has one too. But
one thing to note too, actually, is that any city water, honestly, even well water, will vary throughout the year too. So whatever numbers you get back from a test kit, those are actually going to vary by usually like 20, even 30% throughout the year.
Yeah.
So
test early and often, or just test once and call it a day.
Yeah.
Go by your own flavor profiles. If you feel like you need mineral additions to up your beer, play with it around and get more into it. And if you feel like you make good beer without it, then don't worry too much about it. That's what we say. If your flavor profile, your taste buds are the best.
All right, send in any more questions. I think, what time is it? We'll probably answer just a couple more before we close this guy out.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling up to see if we've got anything else. I think there's some stuff back when we were talking about lactose, but that's kind of someone's asking if we're going to do Celsius or Kelvin. I haven't learned those. Celsius.
I prefer. Oh, dang it. There's another scale I was thinking of.
No, we can just go with Kelvin. We'll say everything in Kelvin from now on. So you really want to heat your strike water up to negative 100. What?
No, it'd be like
negative 150. Isn't Kelvin like negative 270 something? Is it Celsius?
Yeah. So
or is it positive?
No, it's positive. Yeah.
Heat your water up to 300 Kelvins. All right, we're not getting the 10 more questions. It doesn't look like. It's been a second since we asked for questions, though. But we are going to start wrapping this up.
Thank you all for tuning in today. This was a great chat with you, as always. Hopefully you got some good stuff, especially out of that oak section. I know that was pretty dense, as well as even the water chemistry was also kind of dense. But,
yeah,
that's us for you. We like to nerd out on things.
Yeah, and hopefully it was, information rich without being too overwhelming. We're not trying to like go super, super deep dive into these. I think we got to go do that kind of when we're talking about each specific part in itself. And we usually save that for whole videos. So in this discussion section, hopefully you're able to pick something up there. Let us know if you've got questions or suggestions for next week, or if you want to send us beer. Stay safe. Stay warm.
Stay safe.
Make a fire.
Hey, give us that like if you are still hanging into this too. It really helps out build the channel. Also, make sure to hit the little notification button. That way, whenever we do any of these live shows in the future, it will actually pop up and say, hey, they're going to be doing a live show at blah, blah, blah time. So
yeah, that way you know.
Anyway, we will see you next time on Genus Brewing. Once again, thank you all for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. See you at least next week, if not before.
Woo!
Now I gotta walk all the way out. Oh my God. Oh, I think I pulled a muscle. Ow.
I feel like this couch is breaking down or something.
Maybe we should have spent more than $200 on it.
Oh. I like Dragon Balls.